the first warning did not come from a press conference. It came from a floor producer standing behind a camera in a studio in Orlando, holding up 2 fingers, then 3, then 5. Because the live segment kept getting extended while the control room tried to decide whether the words on the screen were safe to read out loud. I was sitting at the edge of a desk with an earpiece half secured in my right ear, wearing a jacket that still had a folded receipt in the pocket from lunch, and I was supposed to explain why the National Aeronautics and Space Administration had quietly moved a scheduled asteroid briefing from Tuesday afternoon to Monday night. The anchor asked me if the object was dangerous. I told him the honest answer. It was too far away for anybody serious to say that yet, and too strange for anybody serious to dismiss. That answer upset people more than a dramatic one would have. A clean denial gives people something simple to hold on to. A clear threat gives officials a direct response plan. This was worse because it sat in the middle, verified enough to require public attention and uncertain enough to make every sentence dangerous. I had spent 31 years doing public affairs work around launches, shuttle accidents, budget hearings, hurricane rollbacks, and all the strange little moments when science had to step in front of the cameras without promising more than the data could carry. I was retired by then. 62 years old, living near Cocoa Beach, doing occasional commentary when a station wanted an old space guy who could talk without shouting. That night I was not there to make news. I was there to slow it down before it ran ahead of the facts. The object had been flagged 3 months earlier by automated sky surveys, but nobody in public heard much about it because the first measurements were boring in the way deep space is boring to most normal people. A moving point source, very cold, very dim in visible light, brighter in thermal infrared than expected, not close to any catalog comet, dwarf planet, or known trans-Neptunian object. Its motion did not fit the ordinary drift of a distant body bound to the sun. It had a high incoming velocity, and the early solution suggested it had entered the solar system from interstellar space. The phrase used in the internal note was rogue planetary mass object. The public version said interstellar object of unusual size. That difference matters. Public language is not only about truth, it is about not giving people a headline that claims more than the evidence supports. A rogue planet is a planet that does not orbit a star. It moves through deep space alone, dark and cold, carrying whatever heat remains inside it, and whatever chemistry survived its ejection from wherever it formed. Astronomers had expected such bodies for a long time. Some surveys had found candidates. The galaxy should have plenty of them. Dead worlds, mostly. Frozen surfaces. Thick atmospheres in some cases. Internal heat if the object was young enough or massive enough. Nobody expected a convenient little world with porch lights in neighborhoods and somebody waving from a window. That is not how serious people think. That is not where this started. The first strange part was size. The first public estimate gave a range wider than anyone wanted. Larger than Mars, smaller than Neptune. That sounded sloppy to people watching at home, but it was honest. The object was far beyond the orbit of Neptune when the story broke, and it was not reflecting sunlight in any useful way. Its heat signature and gravitational effects gave the best clues. It had enough mass to tug slightly on known outer solar system bodies. It had enough thermal output to separate it from background noise. It had an atmosphere, or at least something above the surface that absorbed and re-emitted radiation. It was not a bare rock. It was not a comet. It was moving inward. The second strange part was the briefing delay. Agencies delay briefings all the time for dull reasons, bad slides, legal review, scheduling fights. A senior official stuck on a plane, some partner agency refusing to sign off on one sentence. I told the anchor that I meant it. Then a production assistant handed me a printed still from a long exposure image taken by a space telescope after the object had crossed a faint star field. The image had been contrast stretched, annotated, and cropped. Most viewers would have seen a smudged oval with a few bright marks near the lower right limb. I saw the note at the bottom first. Repeatable luminous features, not stars, not detector artifacts, not cosmic ray events. I stopped talking for 3 seconds. That was long enough for the anchor to turn away from the teleprompter and face me directly. He knew I had seen something I did not want to say. I put the paper down flat on the desk and told him the image showed surface or near-surface light. Sources, but that the word surface was doing a lot of work because nobody had an actual map yet. I said the lights could be auroral activity. Electrical discharge, volcanic openings, methane flare chemistry, instrument scatter, or some other physical process that had no connection to life or technology. I kept my voice level. That was the job. Inside my head, I was already arguing with the paper. Earth's night side is dangerous to compare with anything else because every person has seen those satellite images and every person already knows the answer. Cities form chains along coasts and rivers. Highways draw thin lines. Oil fields show grids. Fishing fleets appear in clusters that move over water. Military sites can glow in odd places. Wildfires, lightning, and gas flares can confuse people who are not used to looking at nighttime imagery. When I explained that on air, I was trying to keep the audience inside the evidence. Organized light does not automatically mean cities. Repeatable light does not automatically mean intention. Pattern does not automatically mean mind. That is not skepticism for sport. That is how you keep from lying to people by accident. Then the second image arrived while we were still live. Same object, different instrument. Longer exposure. Different angle because the object had moved enough against the background stars for parallax to matter. The bright marks were not in the same arrangement. Some had shifted, not smeared, shifted. A cluster near the terminator line had become a clean rectangular section, then broken into smaller points. A faint line under cloud cover brightened in sequence from west to east, not all at once. The image team had already checked the obvious failures. Detector columns, pointing drift, compression artifacts, scattered light from nearby bright sources, rolling shutter issues, and bad calibration files. The note at the top was shorter than the first one. Pattern change confirmed. The anchor asked, "Can lights move on a planet?" He meant it in the simple way a decent broadcaster should ask when the audience needs plain words. I said yes. Lights can move, lightning moves, fires move, storm systems move, reflections can move, auroras can change fast, human lights move too. Ships, aircraft, vehicles, trains, temporary camps, emergency response activity. I did not say alien vehicles because that would have been cheap and wrong. At that moment, the data supported only one sober statement. Something on or above that rogue world was producing light and organized, changing patterns while the object was still too far from the sun for ordinary sunlight-driven activity to explain most of it. That sentence hit the studio in a way I could feel before I understood it. Phone started vibrating on the desk behind me. The floor manager kept one hand over his headset and stared at the glass wall of the control room. A meteorologist who had been waiting for the next segment stood near the weather display with her arms folded and did not move. The anchor kept going because he was good at his job. He asked if Earth was in danger. I told him the truth again. The preliminary path did not show an impact. It did not need to. A planetary mass object passing through the solar system can disturb comets, alter minor body orbits, affect spacecraft navigation, and create gravitational consequences that require careful study. Danger is not only collision. That was the first night. By morning, every lazy version of the story had already escaped. City lights on dead planet, NASA hiding alien world. Rogue planet aimed at Earth, end of days, proof of God, proof against God. Hoax made by artificial intelligence, military cover story. Stock market manipulation, a new kind of comet, a black hole with lights. I saw all of that before I finished my first cup of coffee. My phone showed 400 missed messages. My old agency contacts did not call. That worried me more than the strangers calling me a liar online. When National Aeronautics and Space Administration people go quiet in a coordinated way, either lawyers are in the room or defense officials are. I drove from Cocoa Beach toward the media facility near Kennedy Space Center just after sunrise. The roads look normal in the way Florida can look normal during a national emergency if the sky is blue and the gas stations are open. Contractors in pickup trucks, tour buses, a man in a lawn service shirt buying iced coffee at a convenience store, people standing near pumps, checking phones, reading the same headline with different faces. The object was still far beyond Neptune. Nothing in the air had changed. Birds moved over the marshland. The vehicle assembly building stood in the distance, clean and huge and familiar. That normal morning did more to scare me than a siren would have, because public knowledge had changed while daily life still looked unchanged. At 10:18 in the morning, the agency released the first formal public data package. That was the right move, and I said so on television. A bad agency hides uncertainty until it loses control of the story. A better one publishes enough for independent people to test it. The package included position measurements, uncertainty ellipses, thermal readings, basic photometry, and processed images with warnings about interpretation. It did not include raw defense satellite data. It did not include the highest resolution classified imagery. It did not include the internal memo that had started moving through phones in Washington before dawn. I did not have that memo yet, but I knew it existed because 3 retired people texted me the same phrase within 7 minutes, not naturally decelerating. That phrase is the kind that gets abused by the internet. Natural objects can show acceleration that is not caused only by gravity. Comets vent gas. Small bodies can shift because of radiation pressure. Uneven heating can change rotation. Measurement errors can fake a pattern before enough data arrives. So I was careful when a national network brought me on that afternoon. I said the object's motion appeared inconsistent with a simple gravity-only path, but the data arc was still short and the body was massive enough that small errors could create misleading early fits. I pushed back hard on the host when she asked if the planet had engines. I told her there was no evidence for engines. There was evidence that the path needed more measurements. By then, the amateur astronomy community had already become important. People underestimate amateurs because the word sounds casual. That is a mistake. A serious amateur with a backyard observatory, clean timing discipline, good software, and patience can confirm positions that matter. In Arizona, New Mexico, Spain, Australia, South Africa, and Chile, private observers started reporting the same moving object against the same background field. Most could not see the light patterns. The object itself was too dim in visible light for ordinary gear, but the position was real, the motion was real, the incoming path was real. By late afternoon, nobody credible was calling the object fake. The first confirmation of the lights from outside the agency came from a university team in Hawaii using a large ground-based telescope and a near-infrared camera. The news desk received the statement 5 minutes before I went back on air. The team was cautious, which made the statement more powerful. Luminous features were detected at the expected object position. Some features persisted across multiple exposures. Their distribution did not match background stars, cosmic ray strikes, or known instrument artifacts. The team did not identify the source. It did not use the words city, alien, signal, message, or life. That was exactly how serious confirmation sounds. Dry, narrow, hard to dismiss. I read the statement out loud and then stopped the anchor from filling the silence with a bigger conclusion. I told him the next responsible question was not, who lives there, it was, what physical process can create organized changing light on a cold rogue planet far from strong sunlight? That question had a real list of possible answers: electrical storms under a dense atmosphere, cryovolcanic vents, fractures exposing hot interior material, chemical reactions involving exotic atmospheric compounds, charged particles interacting with magnetic fields, bioluminescent organisms if anybody wanted to stretch biology into conditions nobody had sampled, artificial infrastructure if all natural explanations failed. Put artificial last, I said, not because it was impossible, because once it enters the room, people stop hearing the other options. That night, the light pattern changed again. This time it was not a subtle shift. A dark region near the southern hemisphere brightened in narrow bands that formed a segmented ring around a large storm system or cloud deck. The ring did not close cleanly. It paused in 3 places. Then 3 points outside the ring brightened at equal intervals and faded together. The sequence repeated 12 minutes later, then 37 minutes later, then not again for the rest of the observation window. Nobody on air should have known that level of detail, but a young producer had a friend at a university observatory, and the friend sent a short clip with the caption, "Tell your old NASA guy to explain this without lying." I watched the clip in a side room on a laptop with the volume off. Even though there was no useful audio, my first reaction was anger, not at the universe, at the leak. Leaks feel brave to people outside the system, but a bad leak can poison data, panic a city, destroy trust, and make every real scientist fight a rumor instead of doing work. Then I watched it a second time and lost the anger. Whoever sent it had not edited in music, labels, arrows, or nonsense. It was a clean sequence. Time-stamped frames, instrument data attached, enough to inspect, enough to frighten a person who knew what natural explanations usually look like. I called a former trainee of mine before I went back into the studio. Her name was Marisol Vega. I had known her when she was 26, sharp, impatient, and tired of older men telling her how public messaging worked. She became a mission planner at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, then moved into interagency trajectory work because she had the rare kind of mind that could think in math and consequences at the same time. She answered on the 4th ring. I asked if the leaked light sequence was real. She did not say hello. She said, "Do not call it a planet on television tonight." I asked what I should call it. She said, "Call it an object until we know whether the motion is passive." That was the first time my hands got cold. I was sitting in a makeup chair with a paper cup of water on the counter and a woman brushing powder off my collar, and Marisol was telling me not to assume the object was simply falling through the solar system. I asked if it was accelerating. She said it was correcting. I asked her to define correcting. She said the residuals were shrinking in ways that did not match new measurements alone. The predicted path was not merely improving. It was changing toward the inner solar system with small lateral adjustments that made no sense for a dead body. Then she did the thing careful people do when fear starts to push them past evidence. She corrected herself. She said, "That is my read. It is not the official conclusion. You did not hear it from me." I told her I would not use her name. She said she did not care about her name. She cared about me telling people the wrong comfort. No immediate impact was true, she said, but not enough. No immediate impact with Earth did not mean no interaction. No interaction did not mean no hazard. No hazard in the first path model did not mean no hazard after course changes. She said the defense people were asking about approach geometry, not collision probability. Then the line went quiet for long enough that I thought it had dropped. She came back and said it wants visibility. I did not repeat that phrase on air. It was too loaded, too human, too easy to twist. I went live at 9 o'clock and said the object's trajectory remained under active review because new measurements had reduced some uncertainties and raised others. That was true. I said the public should stop sharing claims that the agency had predicted an impact. That was true. I said several independent observatories had confirmed changing luminous features associated with the object. That was true. The anchor asked the question everybody wanted answered. Are we looking at life? I said. We are looking at activity. Life is one possible category. Technology is another possible category. Natural geophysics is still on the table. Anyone who tells you only one answer is selling certainty he does not have. That line made people angry from every direction. The believers wanted a clean yes. The skeptics wanted a clean no. Politicians wanted wording that protected markets. Agencies wanted wording that protected options. Religious leaders wanted statements that did not make people riot. Traders wanted timing. School districts wanted guidance for the next morning. Airport authorities wanted to know if this affected navigation. The Coast Guard wanted to know why fishing boats near the Keys were reporting people staying offshore overnight to watch the sky, even though the object was far too dim to see without instruments. Normal people wanted someone to say whether to go to work. Nobody with honest data could give them the kind of answer that calms a household. By the 3rd day, government pressure became visible. It never starts with a man in a dark suit telling you to shut up. That is movie logic. Real pressure arrives through scheduling, access, language suggestions, delayed callbacks, reminders about national security, and polite requests to avoid unhelpful framing. The network received a guidance sheet from a federal communications office. It did not order us to say anything false. That would have been easier to reject. It asked outlets to avoid speculative language around non-human intelligence, artificial signals, steering, inhabited structures, and hostile intent. Some of that was reasonable. Some of it was an attempt to narrow public thought before the facts were settled. I argued with a senior producer in a hallway over the word artificial. She wanted it removed from my segment notes. I said removing it would be dishonest because artificial infrastructure was now a formal hypothesis inside several working groups. She said the network had counsel involved. I told her counsel could explain near-infrared imaging to the audience if counsel wanted the chair. That was rude. I was tired. She was tired too. She had spent the morning fielding calls from advertisers, federal offices, and affiliates in cities where people had lined up outside grocery stores because some idiot with a large following said the planet would block sun by Friday. She was not trying to hide the truth. She was trying to keep the country from acting on garbage. That is the part people miss when they imagine crisis broadcasting. The problem is not only secrecy. Speed without discipline causes damage too. A false claim can move through a population faster than a correction can be written. A real claim with one bad word can cause damage that no later clarification repairs. I had no patience for officials who tried to sand down the facts, but I had even less patience for people who treated uncertainty as permission to invent. We had a rogue planetary mass object entering the outer solar system. We had organized luminous features. We had independent confirmation. We had signs of possible non-gravitational path changes. That was enough. It did not need embellishment. On the fourth day, a foreign space agency released its own images before any American outlet had them. The images came from a deep space infrared platform and showed the object at lower resolution but over a longer observation span. The lights were not scattered randomly. They appeared concentrated in belts, broken arcs, and grid-like patches. Several bright regions sat under what looked to be cloud cover or haze because the signal softened at the edges and shifted through bands instead of staying crisp. A polar region pulsed in repeating intervals that did not match the object's estimated rotation. That last point mattered. If a light simply rotates into view, it follows the body. This pulsing did not. The object's rotation became the next public argument. Early estimates suggested a day length between 30 and 41 hours, but the light patterns did not respect that. Some features remained active longer than a fixed surface region should have stayed visible. Some dimmed before rotating away. Some appeared at the limb, where the viewing angle made surface lights harder to detect, then brightened again after passing into a better angle. That could mean elevated phenomena in the atmosphere. It could mean errors in the rotation model. It could mean multiple layers of activity at different heights. It could also mean the lights were being turned on and off deliberately. I said all four on television. I did not rank them. The emails I received that week were a record of public psychology under pressure. A retired electrician in Tampa sent me a careful note comparing the light sequences to grid load balancing. A farmer in Iowa wrote that livestock had started acting odd, which had no known connection to the object and still mattered to him because people reach for local evidence when the sky becomes abstract. A mother in Jacksonville asked whether she should tell her 8-year-old son. A pastor in Georgia asked for wording that would not frighten his congregation. A college student sent a spreadsheet of pulse intervals and asked if the numbers meant anything. Most of the numbers did not. The effort did. The worst messages came from people who wanted permission to stop living normally. That sounds harsh, but it is true. A man asked whether to empty his retirement account. A nurse asked whether hospitals would remain open if the lights proved intelligent. A county official asked whether local police should prepare for civil unrest. A school principal asked whether keeping children in class was immoral. I had no authority over any of those choices. I answered only what I could. No verified impact threat, no public evidence of radiation danger, no reason to stop water treatment, farming, shipping, hospital care, or school. Keep systems functioning. Do not turn fear into damage before the object does anything to us. Then a defense satellite confirmed the lights in a way nobody could dismiss. The government did not release the imagery at first, but a public summary came out through a joint statement after pressure from allied governments. Made silence useless. The satellite had observed the object in multiple infrared bands during a scheduled scan. It detected structured emissions from fixed and moving regions. It detected heat signatures that did not match passive cooling. It detected brief narrowband flashes that were not aimed at Earth in any obvious communication sense, but were too clean to be dismissed as ordinary lightning. The statement called them transient emission events. That phrase was accurate, bloodless, and frightening. The market reaction started before the statement finished airing. Aerospace stocks rose, insurance firms fell, gold moved. Energy futures jumped because people suddenly realized a planet with active lights far from a star implied power generation, and power generation implied technology, biology, or physics nobody understood. Defense contractors rose so fast that trading paused twice. Travel bookings to Florida spiked for 2 hours, then dropped after local emergency managers asked people not to flood coastal counties for a thing nobody could see with the naked eye. Grocery stores in Orlando, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, and Phoenix reported runs on bottled water and batteries, which made no direct sense but did not surprise anybody who had watched hurricane season. I went to a supermarket in Merritt Island that evening because I needed food in my house, and because I wanted to see what normal looked like under abnormal pressure. The bread aisle was half empty. Batteries were gone. A woman stood in front of the canned soup with her phone on speaker while her father told her to buy iodine tablets. A young clerk kept restocking paper towels with the tired discipline of somebody who had already answered the same question all day. Two men argued near the entrance about whether the government had known for decades. Nobody was screaming. Nobody was looting. That mattered. Panic is not always a riot. Sometimes it is quiet, repetitive buying by people who feel stupid if they do nothing. The next morning, I made the mistake of saying on air that the public had behaved better than social media suggested. It was true in my area, but too broad. By noon, we had reports of a warehouse fight in Georgia, a false evacuation order spreading through parts of South Carolina, and a school lockdown in Texas after a parent showed up armed and demanded his daughter be released because the second planet was arriving. That phrase, second planet, had become popular overnight. It was inaccurate. The object was not a second Earth, not a new member of a stable orbit, not a mirror of anything. It was an incoming rogue world with active luminous features. Every shortcut made it easier to fear the wrong thing. Marisol contacted me again on the 6th day. She did not call. She sent a message through an old secure channel I had not used since retirement. It contained no classified files, no images, no path tables. Just 12 words. Path revisions are converging on Earth visibility corridor, not Earth intercept. I read that sentence 6 times before I understood why she had chosen those words. Visibility corridor meant the object's path seemed to be putting it where Earth-based and near-Earth instruments could observe it better over time. Not where it would hit us, where we could see it. A natural object does not care whether Earth can see it. A steered object might. I deleted the message from the visible screen and sat for a minute with my hand on the laptop lid. I was in a temporary green room with bad coffee, a plastic plant, and a muted television showing a retired senator yelling at a physicist. The senator wanted to know why nobody had shot the object yet. The physicist looked physically worn out. She explained that shooting a planet beyond Neptune was not a meaningful sentence. The senator said the people wanted action. The physicist said measurements were action. He laughed at her. I turned the television off. That was when I decided I would say more that night, even if it got me removed from the segment. I did not reveal Marisol's message. I did not say steered. I said the incoming path had narrowed and that current models suggested improved observation geometry over the next several weeks. I explained that this was not the same as an impact warning. I also said scientists were examining whether the object's path could be explained entirely by gravity and known non-gravitational effects. The anchor asked if that meant someone or something was guiding it. I said guidance was one possible explanation only if natural explanations failed under more data. Then I added, the public deserves to know that the question is being studied. The control room did not cut me. I think everyone was too tired to pretend the question did not exist. That segment changed my relationship with the audience. Before then, people had treated me as a cautious explainer. After that, both sides accused me of switching teams. Some said I was preparing the public for disclosure. Some said I had surrendered to hysteria. Neither was true. I was trying to preserve the one thing a crisis cannot survive without, a shared floor of facts. The object existed. It was moving inward. It was large. It emitted heat. It showed organized changing lights. Independent observers confirmed the lights. Trajectory questions remained unresolved. No verified impact threat existed. No verified communication had occurred. No verified biological or artificial source had been identified. That list became my daily anchor. The first attempt to communicate with the object came sooner than officials admitted. Later, people would argue about whether it was wise. At the time, it was probably inevitable. You cannot have a luminous, possibly active rogue planet entering the solar system while every nation with deep space capability sits politely with folded hands. The official public line was passive observation. No transmissions directed at the object had been authorized by the United States government. That sentence was carefully written. It did not cover private transmissions. It did not cover other governments. It did not cover radar observations framed as measurement. It did not cover old signals already traveling outward. Earth is noisy. We had been noisy for more than a century. A radio astronomy group in Europe reported no clear artificial signal from the object. A separate group in Australia reported intermittent narrow-band emissions that could not be confirmed by other sites. A university team in California said the alleged emissions matched terrestrial interference after correction. An amateur group claimed a repeating prime number sequence and then retracted it when somebody found the pattern came from their own timing software. Every retraction mattered. It showed the system still worked. People made claims, people checked claims, and some claims died. I told viewers to respect the retractions. A correction is not weakness. It is a scientist refusing to let a wrong statement survive because it feels exciting. On day 8, the object got a temporary designation that sounded dull enough to anger everyone. The Minor Planet Center used a technical label that included the year, survey sequence, and interstellar classification debate. The public ignored it. People kept calling it the City Planet, the Dead Planet, the Lantern World, the Rogue, and a dozen worse names. I used the object most of the time. When I needed variety, I said Rogue World. A producer asked me if that sounded too dramatic. I said it was less dramatic than City Lights. He agreed and wrote it into the lower third graphic. 10 minutes later, a federal office called to complain that Rogue World implied intention. I told the producer to leave it. The best natural explanation for the lights came from a planetary scientist at the University of Arizona. She proposed that the object might have a thick insulating atmosphere, internal ocean layers, tidal stress from a large moon we had not resolved, and cryovolcanic activity venting through fractures in organized bands. The lights could be electrical discharge through mineral-rich plumes, driven by convection and magnetic field interactions. It was a serious idea. I gave it real time on air. It had problems. But all good hypotheses have problems at first. Its strength was that it did not require inhabitants. Its weakness was that it struggled with the moving grid patterns and the repeated pulsing in frozen regions that should not have enough surface energy. The best biological explanation came from a group that studied deep-sea ecosystems and extremophile chemistry. The idea was not little glowing animals walking around in the dark. It was a planet with internal heat, subsurface oceans, and biological mats or colonies exposed through cracks, vents, or translucent ice fields. On Earth, life uses chemical energy in places where sunlight does not reach. That part was real. The trouble came from scale. The lights on the Rogue World covered sections that appeared hundreds of miles across. Biology can cover huge areas, yes, but changing geometric patterns over short observation periods would require organization or environmental forcing that nobody could explain cleanly. I said so. Some people got angry because they wanted life to be gentle. The data did not promise gentle. The best artificial explanation was the one nobody wanted to own in public. Artificial does not have to mean cities in the human sense. It could mean energy collectors, warning beacons, heat management systems, navigation grids, surface maintenance networks, or structures built by something that does not organize settlement around rivers, roads, and shopping centers. That was why the lights felt wrong when compared with Earth. They did not cluster around obvious coastlines. They did not spread from central hubs into suburbs. They did not trace transportation corridors in ways our history would train us to expect. Some moved in squared sections across terrain that should have been unusable. Some brightened under cloud layers, which suggested either huge power or activity above the surface. It was not human city logic. That did not make it less organized. A long exposure image released on day 9 became the picture everyone remembered. It showed the night-side crescent of the object in false color, with thermal structure mapped in dull reds and blues and the luminous features overlaid in white. The agency warned that the image was processed, enhanced, and not what the human eye would see. Nobody cared. The lower hemisphere showed a wide field of broken light grids. Near the upper limb, 3 straight segments crossed each other at angles no coastline would create. A storm mass covered part of the center, but light came through in pulses from underneath. The press called them cities before the briefing ended. I did not. That cost me followers. Good. The briefing that day was held in Washington, but I was in a Florida studio again, linked in for analysis. A reporter asked the agency scientist whether the lights were artificial. The scientist said there was no conclusion. A reporter asked whether the lights were biological. Same answer. A reporter asked whether the object's path had changed. The scientist paused for less than a second, but I saw it. He said the trajectory solution had been refined. A different reporter asked whether the refinement included unexplained acceleration. An official from another office stepped in and said the data were under review. That was the moment the public heard the gap. Not because anybody confessed. Because 2 careful people refused to say the same sentence. After the briefing, my producer asked me what I thought had happened. I said the scientist wanted to answer and was stopped. She asked if that meant cover-up. I said no, not automatically. In a situation involving a planetary mass body, defense satellites, foreign governments, and public order, every word passes through too many rooms. That process can protect facts from sloppy release. It can also bury facts because officials fear public reaction. Both can happen in the same building on the same day. People love simple villains. Real failure usually comes from committees, fear, liability, and intelligent people convincing themselves that delay is the same thing as responsibility. By day 10, the first religious gathering started near the Kennedy Space Center gates. Some were peaceful, some were loud. A group from out of state held signs saying the lights were a warning. Another group held signs saying the lights were deception. A man with a portable speaker accused the agency of opening a door in the sky. A woman handed out bottled water and told people to go home before they got heat stroke. Police kept traffic moving. Employees drove through with badges visible and eyes forward. I had walked those grounds for decades, seeing people pray, shout, film, argue, and sell shirts outside the gates while engineers inside tried to process trajectory data was one of the most American scenes I have ever witnessed. The ordinary world kept pushing through all of it. Rockets still had launch windows. Weather still mattered. A tropical system in the Atlantic forced emergency managers to split attention between a possible hurricane and an interstellar object with unexplained lights. That was not absurd. That was reality. A storm can flood your street long before a rogue planet changes your life. I said that on air and got accused of minimizing the discovery. I was not. I was reminding people to put plywood on windows if the storm track required it. More than one serious problem can happen at the same time. Your local problem still gets a vote. The hurricane turned north and spared the Cape, but the preparation exposed how fragile public attention had become. People refused to evacuate parts of the coast because they wanted to stay near telescopes. Others evacuated inland because they believed the object would cause tides to rise that week, which was false. Emergency managers begged broadcasters to keep messages separate: storm information, space object information, public safety information. I spent one entire segment explaining that the rogue world was too far away to affect tides on Earth in any measurable way at that time. I used plain words: the moon mattered, the object did not yet. That segment got fewer views than a fake video of waves in Miami. On day 12, the first confirmed change in the object's light behavior after human attention became global occurred. I am careful with that wording, because the timing could have been coincidence. It could have been a natural cycle we did not understand. It could have been selection bias because more instruments were watching. Still, the sequence entered every serious timeline. At 3:17 in the morning Eastern Time, multiple observatories recorded a broad dimming across two major luminous regions, followed by the sudden appearance of a new narrow band on the hemisphere facing Earth. That band remained stable for 44 minutes. It consisted of individual points spaced with unusual regularity. Then it turned off from one end to the other. The internet called it a message. The agencies called it a transient configuration. The defense people, according to one source I trusted, called it alignment behavior. I went on air with none of those labels. I said a new luminous feature had appeared on the Earth-facing side of the object and remained visible long. Enough for independent confirmation. I explained that a feature facing Earth does not automatically mean it is aimed at Earth. Planets rotate. Observers are biased toward what faces them. But I also said the timing and geometry would be studied carefully, because ignoring an uncomfortable pattern is not skepticism, it is avoidance. Marisol sent one more message that morning. This one was shorter. It is holding attitude during pulses. I had to read that twice because a rogue planet should not hold attitude for us. A planet rotates because of angular momentum. It can wobble. Its atmosphere can shift. Its magnetic field can produce changing auroras. But if specific emitting regions maintain orientation in a way that favors a viewing direction, either the model is wrong or something about the object is actively controlled. I wanted to call her. I did not. Every line of communication she used carried risk for her. She knew that and sent it anyway. I spent the next hour arguing with myself over how much the public deserved versus how much I could verify. That is not a noble internal struggle. It is a practical one. If I said too little, I helped officials manage fear by omission. If I said too much, I converted one private interpretation into public fact. I had no raw data. I had no permission to attribute. I had one trusted source and a body of public observations that made her warning plausible. I chose the narrow path on air. I said analysts were studying whether some luminous regions were tied only to rotation or whether the object showed evidence of controlled orientation. Yanker stared at me for half a second longer than usual. He understood what I had just opened. The response from Washington came within 12 minutes. A network executive stepped into the studio during a commercial break and told me the phrase, "controlled orientation," was being challenged by federal contacts. I asked if it was false. He said they were not saying false. They were saying premature. I asked if they wanted me off the segment. He looked exhausted and said, "No. We want you to keep people from losing their minds, and every careful word you use brings another wave of calls." I told him there was no way to explain frightening astronomical data honestly without frightening people. The only choice was whether the fear attached to facts or rumors. That afternoon, a group of university observatories released a joint preprint. It was not peer-reviewed yet, and every responsible person said so. It analyzed the light patterns across several nights and concluded that at least some luminous features were inconsistent with random lightning, ordinary aurora, static volcanic vents, or image artifacts. The authors did not claim artificial origin. They recommended continuous observation using visible, near-infrared, mid-infrared, and radio instruments. The key line was buried in the discussion: no known natural model currently accounts for all observed spatial and temporal structure. That is careful science language. Translated for ordinary people, it meant every simple answer had failed. I read that sentence on air because burying it would have been worse. Then I spent 10 minutes explaining what it did not mean. It did not mean impossible. It did not mean alien cities. It did not mean hostile intent. It meant the data were ahead of the models. That happens in science. New observations break old assumptions. Most of the time, the new explanation is still natural. Sometimes it is natural in a way nobody expected. The responsible move was to widen observation and narrow claims. I said it slowly because people needed to hear the discipline inside uncertainty. Facts first, hypotheses second, fear after that, if fear still had a job. The president gave a statement on day 13. It was short, calm, and too polished to satisfy anyone. He said the object posed no confirmed impact threat to Earth. He said the United States was working with international partners. He said public safety systems remained stable. He said people should reject misinformation and continue normal activities. He did not mention the lights until the third paragraph. He called them luminous phenomena. He did not mention trajectory anomalies. He did not take questions. The statement helped for maybe an hour. Then a foreign official told reporters that all possibilities, including artificial origin, were under review. Markets moved again. The polished calm cracked. That night, I was pulled into a live panel with a defense analyst, a theologian, an astrophysicist, and a former intelligence official who kept saying words without committing to any meaning. I hate panels during emergencies. Too many people, not enough accountability. The defense analyst wanted to talk about space domain awareness. The theologian wanted to talk about humility. The astrophysicist wanted more data. The intelligence official wanted everyone to understand that governments plan for low-probability scenarios. The host asked me what Americans should do before going to bed. I said, charge your phone because storms happen. Check on somebody who scares easy. Do not empty your bank account. Do not harass scientists. Go to work tomorrow unless your local officials tell you otherwise. It was the most useful answer given in that hour. By day 14, schools had started building lesson plans around the object because teachers are some of the bravest practical people on Earth. They had children asking whether the planet had people on it, whether those people could see us, whether Earth would be stolen from the sun, whether God made two Earths, whether aliens were mad, whether the lights were houses. I joined a video call with science teachers from Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, not on air, just to help them with language. I told them to say object, not monster, activity, not invasion, light patterns, not cities, unknown, not impossible. Kids can handle unknown better than adults if adults do not dump their own panic into the room. One teacher asked what to say if a child asked whether we were alone. I told her not to answer beyond the evidence. Say we do not know. Say Earth has life. Say scientists are looking at an object that is doing things we cannot fully explain yet. Say it is okay to be curious and a little worried. Say adults are still doing their jobs. That last part mattered more than the astronomy. Children listen for whether the adult voice breaks. If it does not break, the room can keep functioning. I learned that during launch accidents, hurricane briefings, and budget shutdowns, the facts matter. The voice carrying them matters too. The first clear public sign that governments were preparing for more than observation came when several deep space network schedules changed. Large antennas in California, Spain, and Australia had their public tasking adjusted. Some planetary science activities were delayed. A few spacecraft teams complained quietly, then stopped complaining publicly. That did not mean a secret weapon. It meant tracking resources were being concentrated. Radar was useless at that distance for ordinary public imagination, but radio science, timing, and coordination all mattered. Every antenna that could listen, measure, or support spacecraft navigation became valuable. The object had turned the whole inner solar system into a measurement problem. People asked why we did not send a probe immediately. The answer was hard to make satisfying. Space is big in ways the public hears about but does not feel. A probe cannot simply chase a fast interstellar object on command. Launch windows, propulsion, trajectory, power, communications, and time all have a vote. Existing spacecraft were not parked in convenient places waiting for a rogue planet. Some could observe indirectly. Some could be retasked for calibration or distant imaging. A new mission would take planning, money, hardware, testing, and launch capacity. Emergency shortcuts can save time, but physics does not care that the news cycle wants a close-up. Still, planning began. Marisol's group, I later learned, was asked to examine rapid reconnaissance options using heavy-lift launch vehicles, gravity assists, and high-energy upper stages. The first concepts were ugly and honest. Fast flyby only, limited instruments, narrow observation window, high failure risk, no orbit, no landing. No dramatic encounter where a camera drifts over glowing streets. The object was moving too fast and was too massive to treat casually. A mission might give better data years down the line, depending on path and launch timing. That was not the answer viewers wanted. It was the answer the solar system allowed. The lights did not wait for our mission plans. On day 16, the object produced the first event that made even the cautious people change posture. It emitted a broad flash in the infrared, followed by a visible light pattern detectable by several major observatories. The pattern appeared across a region near the equator and propagated in sections. It was not bright enough to see by eye from Earth. It was bright enough to saturate part of one instrument that had been configured for dim features. The timing of the flash lined up with the moment Earth, the sun, and the object formed a cleaner observation angle than in previous days. Coincidence remained possible. Fewer people said that first. I was on air when the confirmation came. The anchor had been reading local updates about school security and hoax threats when my earpiece clicked and a producer said, "We have a confirmed flash from 3 sites. I asked for the source. She gave me the names. Good sites, serious sites." I held up one hand, waited for the anchor to pause, and said we had new observational reports that needed careful handling. I told viewers not to share screenshots until agencies released calibrated images. Then I described the event without decoration. A large-scale luminous increase from the object, observed independently, associated with a surface or atmospheric region, analysis ongoing. The anchor asked if it was a signal. I said signal is a dangerous word because it means different things. A lightning bolt is a signal to an instrument. A lighthouse is a signal by design. A wound is a biological signal. A radio transmission can be a signal. What mattered was whether the event carried information intended for a receiver. We did not know. Then I said something I had avoided for 2 weeks. If the event was intentional, the most likely receiver was not a person sitting at home. It was our instruments. The room behind the cameras went very still. That was the first time I let the public hear the shape of Marisol's warning, without using her words. After that, the story stopped being astronomy for most people and became waiting. Waiting changes behavior. People can handle a storm track because a storm has a cone, wind speeds, landfall times, evacuation zones. This had none of that in useful human form. The object was weeks, months, or years from meaningful gravitational consequences, depending on which consequence a person meant. It was already here psychologically. Churches filled, bars filled, gun stores saw lines, planetariums sold out. Telescope shops could not keep beginner equipment in stock, even though most of it could not show the object. Hotels near observatories got calls from people asking for rooms with planet views. Airlines added nothing, but ticket prices into cities with major science centers shifted anyway. A woman from Lakeland stopped me outside the studio one evening. She was not aggressive. She had driven over with her adult son because she wanted to ask somebody in person whether her husband had been right before he died. He had always believed there were other inhabited worlds, she said, and everyone had treated it as harmless talk. Now she wanted to know if he had known something. That question broke my heart in a quiet, practical way because grief grabs new events and tries to make them personal. I told her no evidence suggested ordinary people had prior knowledge. I told her her husband had wondered about a real possibility many decent people wonder about. That was the only comfort I could honestly give. I had more conversations like that than I can count. A man wanted to know if his brother, who had disappeared years earlier during a mental health crisis, could have been taken by the object. No. A teenager wanted to know if applying to college mattered. Yes. A retired pilot wanted to know if navigation systems would fail. No evidence of that. A nurse wanted to know if she should keep chemotherapy appointments. Yes. A city council member wanted to know whether to postpone a vote on drainage repairs. No, fix the drains. The rogue world did not excuse Earth from its ordinary maintenance. If anything, it made ordinary maintenance more important. On day 18, the International Working Group finally acknowledged trajectory anomalies in public. The statement was careful and late. It said observations suggested small deviations from a purely gravitational trajectory, and that researchers were evaluating possible causes, including measurement uncertainty, outgassing or mass loss, interaction with dust or plasma, unresolved companion bodies, and other mechanisms. It did not say controlled, it did not say steered, it did not say artificial. The questions at the briefing did. A reporter from Germany asked whether a planet could outgas enough to change course without visible plumes. The scientist said it would be difficult. A reporter from Japan asked whether an unresolved companion could explain both the path and lights. The scientist said it remained under study. A reporter from the United States asked whether human civilization had ever observed a natural rogue planet doing this. The answer was no. That no mattered, not because no means impossible, but because it sets the baseline. We had never observed anything quite like this. That did not make every wild claim equal. It made disciplined observation more urgent. I said that until my throat hurt. I said it while clips of the briefing ran on every screen behind me. I said it while the network tried to push me toward bigger language. I said it after a congressman demanded immediate disclosure of all classified satellite data, which sounded good until you remembered that satellite capabilities are also national defense secrets. Transparency matters. So does not handing every adversary a technical manual. Adults have to hold both thoughts at once. The public hated that kind of answer. I understood. People wanted clean sides because clean sides lower stress, full disclosure versus cover-up, aliens versus rocks, faith versus science, panic versus denial. None of those pairs matched the situation. A person could demand honesty and still understand some data needed processing before release. A person could consider artificial origin without declaring invasion. A person could pray and still listen to orbital mechanics. A person could distrust government statements and still reject fake videos. The crisis exposed lazy thinking. It still does. On day 20, the lights formed the first pattern that I personally could not file under natural without feeling dishonest. The sequence lasted a little under 2 hours. It began with dimming across most visible luminous regions. Then 4 bright areas appeared near the apparent equator. The points were not perfectly evenly spaced because the planet was a sphere and our viewing angle distorted distances, but corrected mapping placed them close to a great circle path. Each area split into smaller points. Those points brightened in order, then reversed, then held steady. The sequence repeated with a different spacing. Several teams searched for mathematical encoding. None found a clean message. That made it worse in a way. It looked organized without being readable. I said so on air, and I used the word organized with care. Organized does not mean intelligent. Snow crystals are organized. Planetary rings are organized. Storm bands are organized. Biological colonies can be organized without thought in the human sense. Machines can be organized. Civilizations can be organized. The question was what kind. I told viewers the new sequence was difficult to explain using the leading natural models, but difficult is not impossible. Then I said artificial origin had moved from fringe speculation to a serious hypothesis among analysts. That sentence was the line I had avoided for 20 days. I said it because not saying it had become less honest than saying it. The network received angry calls before I left the chair. A federal liaison objected. 2 scientists thanked me privately. 3 others said I had gone too far. 1 said I had not gone far enough. That is how you know the issue is difficult and the evidence is uncomfortable. Marisol did not contact me that night. I wondered if she had been warned. I wondered if my wording had put pressure on her team. I wondered if I had protected the public or simply made the fear more official. Then I went home and found my neighbor standing in my driveway with a flashlight even though the street lights were on. He asked if the lights on the object meant the power grid here would go down. I told him no. He nodded and asked if I was sure. I said nobody is sure about everything, but yes, I was sure about that specific thing. People often think fear makes a population stupid. It can. It can also make people precise in strange little ways. My neighbor did not ask for the meaning of life. He asked about the grid. A mother asked about school lunch. A mechanic asked if global positioning satellites would still work. A fisherman asked if he should cancel a trip. A county emergency manager asked if shelters needed extra staffing because rumors were moving faster than official posts. Those were answerable questions, and answerable questions became my refuge. I could not tell Earth what the rogue world wanted, if wanting applied at all. I could tell people what still worked. On day 22, a group of amateur astronomers in rural Nevada captured a faint brightening that matched professional timing. The image quality was poor, but the coordinates and timestamp were solid. I loved that data point more than some of the clean agency images because it proved the discovery longer lived only inside institutions. A retired machinist, a school librarian, and a software engineer had stayed up in the desert with equipment they understood, followed protocol, and added one verified measurement to the public record. That is how knowledge survives pressure, not through one grand announcement, through many careful observers refusing to fake certainty. The next day, a bad actor released a forged image showing a clear geometric symbol across the planet's night side. It spread everywhere. It had all the signs of a fake, too sharp, wrong noise profile, stars copied from an old survey, labels in the wrong font, no instrument metadata, no original file chain. I debunked it on air in under 3 minutes. People who wanted it to be real called me a government puppet. People who wanted everything to be fake used the debunking to claim all images were forged. Both reactions were wrong. One fake image does not disprove real data. One real data package does not validate every dramatic screenshot. This should be obvious. During a crisis, obvious things need repeating. By week 4, the object had become part of daily life in the United States. Morning shows had segments on talking to children. Financial channels had trajectory risk graphics made by people who had no business drawing. Trajectory risk graphics. Hardware stores sold out of generators in places with no weather emergency. Late-night hosts made jokes that were not very funny, but helped people breathe for a second. Churches held vigils. Universities held public lectures. City councils passed pointless resolutions demanding federal transparency. Some families stopped speaking because one person believed the lights were a warning and another believed it was all staged. The object was still physically distant. Socially, it had arrived. The science kept moving. Better estimates placed the object closer to the size of a small ice giant, though the uncertainty remained large. It had a thick atmosphere rich in compounds that absorbed visible light and re-emitted infrared. Its internal heat was higher than expected for a dead old rogue body, unless it was younger, more massive, tidally stressed, artificially heated, or produced energy through unknown means. No star warmed it. The sunlight reaching it was weak beyond normal human intuition. Regions on the surface or within the atmosphere were emitting energy at levels that required a source. That source became the central question. Heat first, light second, pattern third, intent last. I kept that order because it preserves sanity. Heat can be measured, light can be mapped. Pattern can be analyzed, intent is inferred. Humans are bad at intent, even with other humans standing in front of us. Inferring intent from a rogue planet beyond Neptune is dangerous work. I said that on air after a former official declared the object hostile because it had not answered human transmissions. That was foolish. Silence is not hostility. Light is not invitation. Approach is not attack. Correction is not proof of malice. I pushed back harder than the host expected. Fear does not make bad reasoning acceptable. It makes bad reasoning more expensive. The host asked if I thought the object wanted Earth to notice it. I paused because I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect that simple denial for myself. Instead, I said the observation geometry, light timing, and possible trajectory adjustments were consistent with an object that could become more visible to Earth over time. But consistency is not proof. That was the honest answer. Then I added that if visibility was the goal, the object had achieved it. Every major telescope that could observe it was observing it. Every major government had a task force. Every ordinary person with a phone had heard of it. If there was a receiver, humanity had become one. That sentence followed me for the rest of the week. It got clipped, quoted, misquoted, set to music, turned into panic posts, and printed on shirts by people outside the Kennedy gates. Humanity had become one receiver. I regretted the wording because it sounded cleaner than the situation deserved. But I also knew why it stuck. People understood it. They felt watched by a thing that did not need to be close to affect them. They felt included in an event they could not influence. That is an awful psychological position. Too much attention, no control. Marisol finally called on the 29th day. Her voice was hoarse. She said she had 4 minutes. I asked if she was safe. She said safe was not the category. Then she told me the path correction had become harder to dismiss because the object had passed through a region where solar gravity and known body interactions were well modeled, and the residuals still showed lateral adjustment, small but persistent, no plume. No mass shedding event large enough, no companion body found. She said teams had started modeling the object not as a passive body but as a Controlled mass. I asked controlled by what? She said, that is above my pay grade and below everybody's fear. I wrote that sentence down after the call ended, then crossed it out because it sounded too memorable. Memorable can be dangerous. The useful part was this. Controlled mass had entered internal modeling that did not prove inhabitants. An automated object could be controlled. A natural process could imitate control under a model we did not have. A civilization could guide a rogue world. A dead civilization could leave systems running. Something biological could alter light without altering path. The path could still have an overlooked natural cause. Every option was strange. Some were stranger than others. None allowed a return to the first briefing's comfort. The public briefing 2 days later did not say controlled mass. It said active trajectory analysis. I watched the scientist delivering it and felt a professional sympathy so strong it hurt. He had the face of a man reading a sentence negotiated by 12 offices. The public Q&A was worse. Reporters asked direct questions. Is the object steering? Is the light artificial? Have we received a message? Is there life? Is there danger? He answered with fragments of truth wrapped in caution. Some people called him evasive. Maybe he was. Maybe he was obeying rules. Maybe he was protecting unfinished work. Maybe he was protecting himself. I had done versions of that job. I recognized the pressure in his jaw. After the briefing, I went live and did something I had never done in my career. I told the audience which questions had not been answered. I did not accuse anyone of lying. I listed gaps. What mechanism explains the trajectory deviations? What energy source explains the luminous regions? Why do some patterns appear to favor Earth-facing geometry? Why do pulse intervals change? What natural models remain viable? What data are being withheld for national security? And what summaries can be released without exposing capabilities? What is the plan for international communication if artificial origin becomes the leading explanation? Those questions were fair. They were not panic. They were citizenship. That word citizenship mattered to me. In a crisis, officials often talk to the public as if the public is a dangerous liquid that must be contained. Sometimes the public earns that treatment. Many times it does not. People can handle frightening truth if it arrives with context, limits, and practical guidance. People break when truth leaks out in pieces after days of denial. I'd seen that before in smaller disasters. A scrubbed launch, a failed vehicle, a hurricane track that shifted overnight, a contaminated water system. The scale was new. The communication problem was not. On day 33, the object gave us the closest thing to a direct hello, and it still was not a hello. A series of light pulses appeared across 3 regions separated by thousands of miles. The sequence repeated in visible and infrared bands with slight delays. Mathematicians and signal analysts tore into it immediately. Prime numbers, hydrogen line references, pi binary encoding, star maps, pulsar timing, chemical spectra, all of it. Nothing fit cleanly. The strongest finding was that the timing appeared non-random and may have been constrained by the object's rotation and our observation window. That meant it could be intentional. It also meant it could be a physical process tied to geometry. The universe refused to make the headline easy. I delivered the update from the studio with only 1 camera and a producer sitting on the floor behind it because half the staff had been reassigned to special coverage. I remember the small things, the paper cup bending in my hand, the warm air from the lights, the anchor's pen tapping once and stopping, the text on the monitor changing from luminous event to global watch. I said the new pulse sequence had been confirmed. I said no verified message had been decoded. I said people should ignore anyone claiming translation. Then I looked into the camera and said, we may be dealing with activity that is organized without being meant for us, or activity organized specifically because we are watching. We do not know which. That was the sentence I stand by most. It left room for the 2 hardest possibilities. The rogue world might be alive or active in ways that had nothing to do with Earth, and we were assigning ourselves importance because humans do that. Or the rogue world might be arranging its behavior for observation, and our instruments were part of the event. Both possibilities were frightening for different reasons. One made us small, one made us noticed. Neither gave us permission to invent details. The first civil unrest tied directly to the object broke out in a suburb outside Phoenix after a fake evacuation notice claimed the government expected gravitational disruption within 48 hours. People blocked roads near a school. Police moved in. Several people were hurt. No one died, thank God, but the footage went national and became another argument instead of a lesson. One side blamed secrecy. Another blamed social media, another blamed weak education, another blamed foreign influence. All of those had pieces of truth. None helped the teachers and police officers trying to get children home through a crowd that believed the sky had issued a deadline. I spent that night angry, not dramatic angry, functional angry. I wrote a segment by hand because typing made me go too fast. I told viewers that false deadlines were a form of harm. I said there was no 48-hour gravitational warning. I said no official evacuation had been issued anywhere in the United States because of the object. I said if a local emergency alert did not come from local emergency management, state officials, or a verified national system, treat it as suspect. I repeated that 3 times in different ways. It was not exciting television. It may have kept somebody from loading children into a car at midnight for no reason. The object kept coming inward, still far, still cold, still brighter in ways it should not have been. The more data came in, the less dead it appeared. That was the phrase I finally allowed myself off air. Not dead. A dead world can have geology. A dead world can have storms. A dead world can glow in cracks. But this object behaved like a system with active states. It changed, selected, pulsed, corrected, concealed, revealed. Those verbs sound intentional, and I am careful with them. In the lab, each one had a technical version. In the public mind, they became a personality. I fought that every day. The object was not a character. It was an unknown physical reality. Still, people gave it moods. On quiet nights, they said it was sleeping. During pulses, they said it was speaking. When officials delayed data, they said it was waiting. When false stories spread, they said it was testing us. That is human. We put faces on storms and names on ships and intentions on markets, but this time, the habit was dangerous because the object might actually involve intention. And sloppy human projection could bury the real kind under fantasy. I told viewers not to treat it as friendly or hostile until evidence supported either. Respect unknowns. Do not domesticate them. Do not demonize them either. A month and a half after the first broadcast, the object reached a brightness threshold where high-end amateur equipment could detect its thermal position with coordinated methods. It still was not visible to the naked eye. That disappointed people who had imagined stepping outside and seeing a second world hanging over Florida. The sky looked ordinary, the moon changed phases, planes blinked, heat lightning flickered over the coast some nights. The object lived in instruments, models, data releases, and human behavior that made it harder to process. A threat you cannot see can become whatever your fear wants. A discovery you cannot see can become whatever your hope wants. I went back to Kennedy for a private technical background session around that time. No cameras, no public feed. Just a room with scientists, agency communicators, emergency managers, and a few people from departments that did not introduce themselves fully. The mood was not panic. It was controlled exhaustion. Slides showed trajectory corridors, observation schedules, confidence intervals, pulse maps, thermal models, and civil response concerns. Nobody said invasion. Nobody laughed either. The most frightening slide had no image of the object. It showed public trust metrics by region. Trust was falling fastest in places where officials had said the least and rumors had replaced verified information. During a break, I stood near a vending machine with an emergency management director from Louisiana. He said, "I can move people from water. I can move people from fire. I cannot move people from a rumor." That was one of the smartest things anyone said during the whole crisis. Physical disasters have boundaries, even when the boundaries shift. Rumors move through families, churches, workplaces, and phones. They adapt. They do not need evidence. The rogue world had become both a physical object and the subject of nonstop rumor production. We needed telescopes for one and trust for the other. The session confirmed something else. Governments were worried about reaction to confirmation more than immediate physical harm. No impact path. No near-term tidal effect, no radiation hazard, no signal decoded. But if the artificial hypothesis became dominant, every social system would shake. Markets, religions, defense postures, alliances, elections, education, mental health, extremist movements, all of it. The officials were not wrong to worry. They were wrong when worry made them slow-walk basic facts. You cannot protect trust by starving it. Trust needs food. The food is timely truth with limits stated clearly. The question of whether to transmit a deliberate message became public after a leaked policy memo appeared online. The memo was real. I could tell by the boring parts. Fake documents usually skip procedure. This one had working group names, consultation steps, liability language, and footnotes about international norms. It discussed whether any directed transmission toward the object should require global agreement. It noted that several private groups had already attempted transmissions using whatever equipment they could access. It recommended a moratorium on intentional high-power messaging until more was understood. The internet read that as proof the government wanted to silence humanity. I read it as proof somebody in the room was still thinking. I supported the moratorium on air, and I got more hate for that than for saying artificial origin was serious. People wanted to shout into the dark. I understood the impulse, but a civilization does not respond to an unknown planetary mass object with every rich hobbyist, cult leader, corporation, and government agency sending whatever message serves personal ego. If communication was needed, it needed coordination, transparency, and restraint. A bad first message might not matter. It might matter a great deal. The fact that we did not know was the argument for discipline. A caller on a live public segment asked who had the right to speak for Earth. That question has no clean answer. The United Nations? The most powerful governments? Scientists? Elected leaders? The species by chaotic broadcast? Nobody? I said no person or nation had a moral right to claim Earth's voice alone, but practical systems still had to make choices. Doing nothing is also a choice. Allowing uncontrolled transmissions is a choice. Pretending the question can wait until certainty arrives is a choice. I could challenge bad logic, but I could not solve political philosophy in a 6-minute segment. I said we needed a public international framework fast. That was true and almost impossible. Then the rogue world changed the argument again. The light stopped, not all at once. Over 6 hours, major luminous regions dimmed until only faint thermal structure remained. Observatories confirmed it, defense platforms confirmed it, university teams confirmed it. The object did not disappear. Its heat signature remained. Its path remained. The organized visible lights dropped below detection. The public reaction was immediate and worse than the reaction to the lights themselves. People had adapted to watching. Losing the lights felt like being cut off from the only evidence that gave the unknown shape. The theories came hard. It had hurt us. It was hiding, it had died, it was preparing, it had turned away, the government had filtered images, the telescopes had been hacked. None of those claims had evidence in the first hours. I went on air and said the dimming was real, confirmed and unexplained. I also said the disappearance of visible lights did not mean the disappearance of activity. Thermal readings still showed energy anomalies. Radio teams still listened, trajectory teams still tracked. It was not gone, it was darker. That difference did not comfort people much, but it was the truth. For 3 days, the object stayed mostly dark in visible light. Those 3 days were some of the hardest for broadcasters because there was less to show and more to fear. The news cycle hates absence. Absence gets filled. I pushed for segments on what teams were doing during quiet periods, calibration, stacking images, comparing bands, revising atmospheric models, coordinating with foreign observatories, watching for outgassing, searching for moons, checking old survey plates for earlier detections. That material did not trend well. It mattered. Science does not stop when the picture gets boring. In a crisis, the boring work may be the most important work being done. On the fourth dark day, Marisol came to Florida. I did not know until she called from a rental car outside the studio and asked if I could meet for 20 minutes. We sat in a nearly empty diner off a road I will not name because the waitress who served us did not ask to become part of this story. Marisol looked thinner than the last time I had seen her in person. She ordered coffee and did not drink it. She said the object's attitude behavior had changed before the lights shut down. I asked whether the shutdown was a response to observation. She said nobody could prove that. Then she said the shutdown occurred after a set of human high-power transmissions from non-government sources. I said that sounded too convenient. She nodded and said it might be. The transmissions could have had nothing to do with it. The timing could be chance. The object could have entered a different activity cycle. A cloud layer could have thickened. A global storm could have covered visible features. Energy could have shifted to wavelengths we were not watching well enough. She listed the natural and technical alternatives before I could accuse her of jumping. Then she placed a folded paper on the table, not a printout. Handwritten numbers, times, bands, observation notes. She said, if you talk about this, talk about timing, not cause. That was Marisol at her best. Afraid, but still disciplined, I asked why she was giving it to me. She said because officials were about to blame private transmissions for the shutdown without evidence, and activists were about to claim the shutdown proved the object had answered. Both would be wrong. The only honest statement was that the shutdown followed several directed transmissions close enough in time to require analysis. No causal link established. I put the paper in my inside jacket pocket and told her she was asking me to make everybody mad. She said, "You are already doing that." For the first time in weeks, I laughed. That night, I delivered exactly that. I said analysts were reviewing whether the timing of the dimming related to human-directed transmissions, while emphasizing that no causal link had been established. The sentence remained accurate during the segment. Online, people stripped away the careful wording. By morning, half the country thought hobbyists had angered the rogue planet, and the other half thought the government had invented a scapegoat to control speech. A third group, because there is always a third group, believed the dimming meant successful contact had occurred and was being hidden. The truth was smaller and more difficult. Timing existed. Cause did not. The visible lights returned on day 46. They returned in a new arrangement. That was the part that ended one phase of the crisis and began another. The old belts and grids did not simply brighten again. New luminous regions appeared closer to the hemisphere that would face Earth during the next major observation window. Several old regions remained dark. A wide band near the northern hemisphere produced low-level pulses across a huge area, while 3 compact points emitted higher energy flashes at intervals that matched no previous sequence. The object had not resumed. It had reconfigured. I said reconfigured on air, then immediately explained that I meant appearance, not confirmed machinery. Words matter. People hear reconfigured and imagine engineers. The data showed the luminous pattern changed into a new stable arrangement after a dark period. That is the safe sentence. Safe does not mean comforting. Safe means supported. The astrophysicist beside me looked relieved that I corrected myself. The host looked annoyed because corrected language makes weaker clips. I did not care. A crisis should not be treated as raw material for clips. Too often it is treated that way. The new pattern lasted long enough for mapping teams to build the first rough global light model. It was ugly, uncertain and historic. The map showed luminous activity concentrated in bands that ignored apparent geography. Some crossed elevated regions. Some vanished under atmospheric opacity. Some appeared over what thermal models suggested were frozen plains. One region moved relative to the surface map, or else the surface map was wrong. That moving region became the center of the artificial argument. It behaved less like a storm and less like a fixed structure. It behaved like a mobile field of emission controlled by something we could not identify. A defense analyst on another network called it a patrol grid. That was irresponsible. Patrol implies purpose. Grid implies too much certainty. Still, the phrase caught. People imagine vehicles, sentries, machines, armies. I spent 2 segments undoing that damage. I said mobile emission field. That was dull and better. It moved, it emitted, it had field-like extent. We did not know what maintained it. The public does not need childish words. It needs accurate words explained well. If accurate words are boring, then the situation is boring in that part. The unknown already carried enough weight. The most grounded fear arrived from farmers, power grid operators, shipping coordinators, hospital administrators, and mayors. They were not asking about aliens. They were asking about continuity. If public trust kept falling, could supply chains hold? If markets swung every time the object pulsed, could fuel contracts stabilize? If workers stopped showing up because they believed contact was imminent, who ran water plants? If hostile governments used the distraction, what then? That was when I understood the real emergency had 2 clocks. One clock belonged to the rogue world's approach. The other belonged to human systems under uncertainty. The second clock was moving faster. We started doing practical blocks every day. No impact threat at this time. No gravitational effects on daily life at this time. No verified hostile action at this time. No decoded message at this time. Keep emergency kits for ordinary disasters, not fantasy scenarios. Follow local alerts. Do not fire weapons at the sky. Do not trespass at observatories. Do not harass scientists or public employees. Do not send money to people promising protection from the object. Check sources before sharing. It sounds absurd that we had to say some of that. We did, more than once. A man in Central Florida fired a rifle at a bright planet, believing it was the rogue object. The bullet came down somewhere, as bullets do. Nobody was hurt. He was arrested. I talked about it on air because embarrassment can prevent repetition. I explained that the visible object he saw was not the rogue world, and that firing into the air is dangerous and illegal. I did not mock him by name. Fear had made him stupid for a minute, and the law could handle the rest. Public humiliation would not fix the sky. Clear correction might prevent the next man from doing the same thing. Meanwhile, the object's path kept improving, and the phrase Earth Visibility Corridor moved from private language into public analysis under a softer name. Optimized observational geometry. That was bureaucratic, but it was something. A senior official acknowledged that the object's trajectory would allow increasingly favorable observation from Earth and near-Earth assets over the coming months. He said this could be coincidental. He said no conclusion had been reached about intent or artificial control. I believed him on the second sentence and doubted the comfort of the first. Coincidences happen. Patterns can mislead, but by then, coincidence had been carrying too much weight for too long. The first international open hearing was held in New York under heavy security. Scientists from several countries presented data. No flag owned the facts that day, though every flag tried to stand near them. The hearing did not answer the main question. It did something better. It made the uncertainty public in a structured way. People heard disagreements between serious experts. One argued for exotic geophysics, one for atmospheric plasma tied to a magnetic field, one for unknown biology, one for artificial infrastructure or control systems. The artificial advocate did not wear a wild expression or make dramatic claims. She showed residual plots, pulse maps, and energy budgets. That scared people more than shouting would have. Her conclusion was careful. Artificiality should be treated as a working hypothesis with significant evidentiary support, not as established fact. I repeated that sentence for 2 days. It was the most adult public language we had. Working hypothesis, significant support, not established. That is where the world stood. The problem was that everyday life hates standing there. Insurance companies wanted categories. Militaries wanted threat levels. Schools wanted scripts. Parents wanted bedtime answers. Markets wanted probabilities. Faith leaders wanted meaning. Scientists wanted more nights of observation. The object produced more light. On day 54, the rogue world emitted the first pulse pattern that matched a simple mathematical structure after correction for rotation and observation delay. I am not saying it was a message. I am saying the timing ratios were too clean to ignore. Independent teams found the same structure. The numbers were small, whole number intervals, repetition with variation, then a gap, then a second sequence. The analysis community fought for 36 hours over whether the correction methods had imposed the structure. That fight was healthy. Bad methods can create beautiful nonsense. By the end of the second day, the structure remained. I told viewers the truth in stages because that is how the verification arrived. First, analysts are studying a repeating timing pattern. Second, the pattern has been independently identified by several teams. Third, the pattern remains under debate because signal processing can introduce false order. Fourth, if the pattern survives review, it may represent information-bearing behavior. I refuse to say message. The anchor asked why I avoided the word when everyone else was using it. I said a message requires sender, content, and intended receiver. We had possible structure. That was all. Structure is enough to change history. It is not enough to write subtitles. That night, my daughter called. I had kept family out of the public story because the user does not need my family album to understand a rogue planet, and I did not want to turn the crisis into personal drama. But this call matters because it put the public fear into one voice I could not professionally distance myself from. She asked if my granddaughter was safe. I said yes. She asked if I was saying that as a grandfather or as the man on television. I said both, but with limits. Safe tonight. Safe from any verified immediate effect. Not safe from every possible future because nobody owns that kind of promise. She cried quietly. I sat at my kitchen table and listened because explanation has limits too. The next morning I was sharper on air, not because of private emotion alone, but because I had heard the cost of vague reassurance. I told viewers to beware of anyone promising complete safety and anyone promising certain doom. Both were false comforts. The honest position was stable daily life under extraordinary observation. Keep working, keep caring for people, keep institutions functioning. Demand facts, reject rumors, watch the science, prepare for normal emergencies, except that one question was now open in public. We may not be alone in the way we thought, and the evidence may be approaching us inside a planetary body. That last phrase became the new fire. Evidence approaching us inside a planetary body. I had chosen it because it separated discovery from assumption. It did not say fleet. It did not say invasion. It did not say civilization. It said evidence approaching planetary body. Still, it changed the tone. The public had spent weeks asking what the lights were. Now people asked what carried them. A living world, a built world, a shelter, a weapon, a warning marker, a machine, a grave with power still running. Each option carried a different moral universe. None had proof. The lights grew more complex through the next week. A set of regions brightened in nested sequences. A polar feature appeared to rotate independently from the estimated bulk rotation, suggesting atmospheric or orbital structure. Some emissions shifted into wavelengths that required different instruments to track. The energy budget got harder. Geophysics teams revised upward. Biology teams grew more cautious. Artificial teams grew more divided because artificial activity at planetary scale does not automatically mean. Inhabitants are alive now. Automated systems can persist. Ruins can remain powered. Signals can repeat long after builders vanish. That possibility disturbed me more than active occupants some nights. A dead intelligence can still leave instructions. People started asking if the lights were warning markers. That idea came from analysts who noted some bright regions appeared near path-facing hemispheres, not Earth-facing hemispheres. Maybe the object was marking its own trajectory. Maybe it was communicating with something ahead of it. Maybe the lights were navigational, not social. Maybe Earth was not the audience, but an obstacle, a checkpoint, a measurement point, or an accidental observer. That possibility checked our ego. I liked that about it, even though I did not like the implication. Humanity may have been watching a system that did not care about us at all until our transmissions made us relevant. A week later, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and partner agencies announced a rapid mission study. It was not a launch announcement, though headlines said it was. It was a study of launch options, spacecraft designs, instrument packages, and international participation. I explained the difference until I wanted to throw my notes. A mission study is not a rocket on the pad. It is the work before you earn the right to put a rocket on the pad. People were impatient, I was too. But impatience does not solder electronics. Test thermal systems, qualify software, or calculate navigation margins. A rushed probe that fails teaches less than a slower one that works. At the same time, several existing space telescopes and planetary missions were retasked for observation campaigns. That was the real near-term response. Instruments built for other jobs turned toward the rogue world when geometry allowed. Every dataset helped constrain size, temperature, composition, rotation, and emission behavior. One spacecraft beyond Earth orbit recorded a pulse sequence from a slightly different angle, which allowed crude three-dimensional mapping of one luminous field. The field appeared elevated above the surface or embedded in a high atmospheric layer. That weakened the simple city interpretation. Good, the truth was stranger and probably not a neighborhood. I said that plainly. Stop picturing neighborhoods. Stop picturing streets. Stop picturing windows. We do not have evidence for any of that. We have luminous activity from a rogue planetary mass object. Some activity is structured, some may be elevated, some may be artificial. If artificial, it does not need to resemble human settlement. That was one of my constant fights. Human imagination kept shrinking the unknown into human arrangements. Houses, roads, towers, borders, armies. The data kept refusing those shapes. If intelligence was involved, it had no obligation to organize itself around our habits. The most important public data release came near the end of the second month. It combined observations from American, European, Japanese, Indian, and private observatories. It included raw files where possible, process maps, error bars, competing models, and a clear statement of what remained unknown. It was messy. It was the best thing the institutions had done. The release admitted that no known natural model explained all observations, that artificial origin was under serious consideration, that no impact threat existed in current models, and that the object's path showed small, unexplained deviations. It also warned that the object was still far away and that many claims online were false. That document did more for trust than a dozen polished speeches. I spent 3 hours walking viewers through it, not all at once. Across the evening, heat map, light map, trajectory plot, model comparison, what a residual is, why error bars matter, why a failed natural model does not automatically prove artificial origin, why serious consideration is not confirmation, why no impact threat does not mean no future hazard, why government caution can be both necessary and abused. It was the kind of televisions people say they want and rarely reward with ratings. That night they rewarded it. Millions stayed. I think people were tired of being whipped between denial and apocalypse. They wanted the hard middle. Then came the question I could not dodge. The anchor asked, "What do you personally think it is?" I had avoided that for 2 months because personal belief is cheap when public facts are expensive. But the audience had given me attention, and maybe attention deserved a careful personal answer. I said I no longer believed a purely ordinary geophysical explanation was likely. I said biology alone seemed strained by the scale and structure. I said some artificial component now appeared plausible to me. I did not know whether that meant inhabitants, machines, markers, or something else. I did not know whether Earth was the intended audience. I did not know whether the object was dangerous. That was my honest view. The studio did not react. Nobody in my earpiece spoke. The anchor nodded once and asked what people should do with that. Good question. I said nothing tonight that he would not have done yesterday. Eat dinner, check on family, keep appointments, go to work, follow verified updates. Do not join groups promising secret knowledge. Do not sell your house because a light pattern changed beyond Neptune. Do not ignore local storms, bills, medicine, or people who need you. A possible artificial object entering the solar system is the biggest news in human history. But your life still runs through small duties. That is not denial. That is how civilization stays upright while it learns. A few days after that, I received a final note from Marisol before she vanished into a tighter work schedule. It said, "We have started modeling encounter protocols, not discovery protocols." That was another sentence I did not repeat publicly. Discovery protocols are about finding, confirming, explaining. Encounter protocols are about interaction, risk, response, communication, and consequence. The shift was not official in public, but it was real. I knew it from the words people stopped using and the words that replaced them. Observation became engagement planning. Public information became continuity messaging. Scientific unknown became strategic unknown. Nobody had declared contact. Institutions were preparing for the possibility that contact might be declared for them by the object itself. The rogue world's next major pulse came during a clear night over much of the eastern United States. Again, nobody could see it without instruments. But people gathered outside anyway. Beaches, parking lots, church lawns, school fields, apartment rooftops. They looked up at ordinary stars and held phones showing live telescope feeds. That scene stayed with me. Crowds watching a sky that did not visibly change while their screens showed a world far beyond human reach pulsing in processed light. I know that sentence sounds too polished, so let me say it cleaner. People stood outside because staying indoors felt wrong. That was all. The pulse sequence that night did not decode, it did not threaten, it did not greet. It changed the estimated energy output of one region by a factor large enough to force another round of model revisions. A thermal bloom expanded, then narrowed. A mobile emission field crossed a dark area and stopped near the limb. A narrow-band flash occurred at the end of the sequence, detected by 2 sites and missed by 1 because of weather. The object kept behaving like a system revealing parts of itself under conditions we did not control. That was my on-air wording. I still think it holds. The government pressure shifted after that. Early pressure had tried to keep artificial language out. Now pressure tried to keep hostile language out. That was more defensible, because hostile claims had no evidence and could cause real harm. Defense readiness increased in ways officials did not detail. Space monitoring increased. Cybersecurity agencies warned about scams and foreign disinformation. Mental health hotlines added scripts for space-related anxiety. Schools received updated guidance. Hospitals reviewed staffing continuity. Water utilities checked backup power. None of that meant doom. It meant adults in charge of systems were taking the social consequences seriously. They should have done it sooner. I was asked to record a public service segment with a simple message: keep life functioning. I agreed on one condition. The segment had to include the words unknown does not mean immediate danger. It also had to include unknown does not mean harmless. Both are true. The first prevents panic. The second prevents complacency and institutional dishonesty. The communications office resisted the second line. I refused to record without it. We argued for an hour. The line stayed. I count that as one of the few clean wins in the whole mess. By the time I'm recording this account, the rogue world is still approaching. It has not struck Earth. It has not sent a decoded message. It has not caused tides to rise, satellites to fall, or the sun to dim. It has changed global politics, markets, classrooms, churches, dinner tables, and the private thoughts of anyone who has looked at the data long enough. The lights continue, not constantly, not predictably enough for comfort. Some patterns appear surface-tied, some do not. The path remains under review. The artificial hypothesis remains serious. The natural hypotheses are not dead. That is the state of things, and it is not satisfying. Truth often is not satisfying while it is still arriving. I keep thinking back to the first paper handed to me in that Orlando studio. Repeatable luminous features, not stars, not detector artifacts, not cosmic ray events. Such a small set of denials. That was where public understanding changed. Not with a speech, not with a landing, not with a face on a screen, not with a weapon over a city. It changed because careful people removed false explanations one by one, and the remaining possibilities became frightening. That is how real discovery often works. No, that sentence is still too polished. Let me say it plain. We checked the easy answers. They did not hold. If you are listening to this because you want me to say what the lights are, I cannot. If you want me to say whether something lives there, I cannot. If you want me to say whether it is come for us, I cannot. The path suggests visibility more than impact. The lights suggest organization more than accident. The energy suggests an active system more than a frozen dead world. The timing suggests awareness of geometry, but awareness is a word that must be earned. We are not there yet. We may be close. We may be fooling ourselves. The only honest way forward is to keep measuring and keep each other steady while the measurements change us. I know that sounds small against a rogue world. Keep measuring, keep each other steady. But that is the work. The people who want bigger words are usually selling something: fear, certainty, access, salvation, superiority, a private channel to truth. Do not buy it. Watch what can be verified. Ask what changed. Ask who checked it. Ask what would prove it wrong. Ask what you should do today that remains useful under several futures. That last question is the one I trust most. Useful under several futures. Food in the pantry, medicine filled, neighbors known, local alerts verified, children reassured without lies, institutions pressured without being attacked, scientists criticized when needed and protected from harassment. That is not glamorous. It is survival for a thinking society. The last live update I gave before making this recording came after another pulse sequence, one that lit a region under thick cloud cover and then sent a narrow wave of infrared emission across a dark belt. The anchor asked if it was the clearest sign yet. I said it was one more strong sign in a continuing record, and the full record mattered more than one event. He asked if I was afraid. I said yes, but not of the headline everyone wanted. I was not mainly afraid of invasion or impact that night. I was afraid of losing the ability to tell the difference between evidence and craving. The rogue world can do whatever it is going to do. We still control whether we become foolish before it arrives. So this is where I leave it for now. A rogue planetary mass object entered the outer solar system. It was expected to be dark and dead. It was not. Long exposure images showed organized lights. Independent observers confirmed them. The lights changed while we watched. The path raised questions that gravity alone has not answered cleanly. Natural explanations remain, but each one has had to bend around facts it did not predict. Artificial origin is no longer a joke. It is not yet a verdict. The world is waiting under an ordinary sky, going to work, buying groceries, arguing, praying, studying, lying, correcting, and looking through instruments at a place none of us can reach. If the lights are cities, they are not cities built around human needs. If the lights are life, it is life running on rules we do not know. If the lights are machines, someone built systems large enough to make a planet visible in the dark between stars. If the lights are warnings, we have not learned the language. If the lights are not meant for us, then we have mistaken a passing operation for a greeting. Every option should make a serious person quiet for a minute. Then the work continues. That is the part I keep coming back to. Quiet for a minute, then work. Tonight, the latest observation window opens over Chile, Hawaii, Arizona, and parts of Australia. Weather will ruin some sites. Equipment will fail at others. Somebody will forget a calibration file and catch it before release. Somebody will claim a translation by breakfast. Somebody will fake a screenshot. Somebody will produce a careful measurement that changes the model by a fraction and matters more than every rumor. Combined, I will be on air again with the same rules I had on the first night. Say what is known, mark what is unknown. Do not make fear prettier than fact. Do not make comfort stronger than evidence. The lights are still there. The object is still coming inward. We are still watching. And for now, watching is the most important thing humanity has ever had to do without looking away from the life right in front of it.